So while the church was having a great time in Christ over the weekend, we really had a packed weekend. We had communion service, we had church service, we had other services. So the church was really having a great time. President Macron was kicked out of Africa. Very embarrassing and surely frustrating for him. So he's so angry and he's blaming it all on Russia and the Wagner Group. France is not wanted in many countries in Africa, and I guess their Midas touch has turned to dust. I also suppose what's left is for Macron to be kicked out of France. Macron had an argument with the Democratic Republic of Congo president while he was on a visit to the nation. The argument took place when Congo president reminded his French counterpart about his country's involvement in the 1994 genocide. However, Macron bluntly rejected the blame attributed to France. So President Emmanuel Macron now says the era of French interference in Africa was over. The president was on a 4-nation tour of the continent to renew freight ties. The anti-French sentiment still runs high in some former African colonies as the continent becomes a renewed diplomatic battleground, with Russia and the Chinese influence growing in the region. And this is the president's 18th trip to the continent. But the discontent in Africa against how the world powers have treated Africans is still rife. So was Macron's visit to Africa a way to strengthen diplomatic relationships or to defend economic interests? Well, let's talk about this. Mali, Burkina Faso, Central African Republic. The latest word now is that even Niger, which has been one of the reliable French allies, is now starting to have doubts. Doubts about the rule of the French in their countries. The fact is, the French have long overstayed their welcome in all these West African countries. They basically run the financial systems of these countries ever since they grounded these countries into plan. The shadow empire that they created in Africa is disintegrating all around them, and they don't know what to do. Blinken was in Africa. The British hosted a Commonwealth meeting in Africa. The Chinese and the Russians are also in Africa. Now, interestingly, South Africa now has naval exercises alongside China and Russia, and the Americans are not at all pleased with this. So Sudan is opening a Russian naval base. Djibouti already has a Chinese naval base. Ethiopia, which has basically sorted out its war in Tigray, successfully that is also aligning with China and Russia, and so is Eritrea.
Reacting to this question about compromise in Africa, I just want to say that, madam, this is precisely what needs to change in our relations with France in particular, but also with Europe and the West in general. Your way of seeing things when irregularities occur in Africa is different from how you see things when there are irregularities in American elections. No one talks about American-style compromise when irregularities happen in the US. Similarly, when there was a scandal about deceased voters being allowed to vote during Chirac's years in France, no one talked about French-style compromise. I think there needs to be respect and consideration between us. We have no intention of disregarding the opinions of our voters. The electoral process has already begun, and we have raised enough alarms to say that if there is a risk of derailment, it is not because of the country's authorities or the CENI officials.
French, European, and American journalists ask the same questions to their leaders at home. The second thing, and I want to emphasize this because the president talked about France in response to the question. When a French journalist asks a question, it is not the French government. But no, that's the position of France because there is none, there are none.
That is untrue. I do not agree what you said. I want referring to your minister Jean-Yves Le Drian, he is a French official. I am referring to Minister Le Drian, he is not a journalist. What I wanted to clarify is that this also needs to change in the way we cooperate with France and Europe. Look at us differently, by respecting us and considering us as true partners, and not always with a paternalistic gaze, with the idea of always knowing what's best for us.
I found that really very interesting and would like to see more boldness of that nature coming out from more African presidents. But you know what happens if you are bold like that, you come out, you speak for yourself, they come after you. It's like that everywhere. Whether you're a president, whether you're just an ordinary person, you stand for yourself, you become the black sheep. Very interesting. But the big question is, so what happens next to France, to Macron and his, cronies? What happens next? But I want you to listen to Alexander McCory.